Siamo Fuori 3. Like any other sequel, well, those types of things, bad things, good things, and third parts all come in very disgraceful manners, I guess you can say. But for Italian football, Siamo Fuori, of course, the phrase that was said by the commentator in the 1990 World Cup when Italy were eliminated in the semifinals against Argentina. Of course, Siamo Fuori, meaning we're out. Also relevant and prevalent in 2018 when they were eliminated from the World Cup, or they were eliminated from in qualifiers and not being able to go to the World Cup in 2018 by Sweden. Now Macedonia. And like I said, sometimes things come in threes, and in this case, this is probably a worse blow than 2018, because now being out of the World Cup for virtually 12 years, you end up basically wasting a generation. Those are players that ended up being in the final legs of a successful generation now saying goodbye, and a generation of young players not being able to truly reach their peak at the right time, I guess you could say. And it ends up being a very fragile situation for Italian football. Look, I'm going to give credit to someone, and I saw that just the other day. Carlo Garganese, great Italian pundit, that he talked about it the other day, and it seemed like he was foreshadowing that to a certain extent. I don't think he was willing it to happen. He basically saw that the way that Serie A and the FIGC ended up handling this whole situation ended up being just a travesty. You could have stopped the Serie A campaign. You could have had. Keep in mind that in England, many of the players didn't play. It was time for the FA Cup. There were those types of things going on in England, so the Premier League wasn't in action. So that did allow some players to play. It did allow some others to play part of a match. It did allow some others to not even play and maybe even travel a little bit, or those types of things. Just little details. Why I say that? Because there were several players that ended up getting niggles and injuries that prevented Italy from having a full squad. That being said, you still have a team on paper that might have been a little bit better than Macedonia, and they weren't able to take advantage of it. There were certain instances where they could have been able to just nail this game down and really not worry about it, but they didn't. And you know what usually is said: you don't score goals, they get scored on you, and that's exactly what happened in the 92nd minute. So they only have themselves to blame now, and there needs to be a very deep dive. To a certain extent, yeah, okay, fine, they won the Euros last summer, but that does you very little if you don't go to the World Cup. That's plain and simple. That's just common logic, because yeah, it's great to be able to win the Euro for the first time since 1968, but what good does it do you if you end up not going to the World Cup? That's your moneymaker. That's the one. That's the show. That's the showcase. That's the one where you end up, being able to show your talents. That's the one that Italy wants to win for a fifth time. But keep in mind, many were even looking at them as favorites to be able to win the World Cup. Remember, let's rewind a little bit. After the Euros, it seemed the team that they were, and seeing the players that were coming up, and seeing how they were coming into the form, and of course everything else that started occurring. Despite the shortcomings throughout the process, you still thought that they were going to pull through it. As the minutes went by, you started to visualize the fact that maybe he is right. And he was. He absolutely was. He called it tremendously. And you have to give him a great deal of credit because he saw it coming. So, Italy done. Now, South America. Let's switch over. Chronologically, you can't do anything because every match was played simultaneously, or as simultaneous can be played. simultaneously as they wanted it to play. Because Uruguay ended up starting a little bit late, Brazil started a little bit late, the Colombia match against Bolivia, and then the match between, I'm trying to remember, between Paraguay and Ecuador started basically on time. We'll go on. We'll go first. Okay, let's go with Ecuador loses, but they still, based on the result, based on Peru losing, and Peru losing basically allowed them to qualify directly to the World Cup. So the two spots that were pending already have been punched by Uruguay and by Ecuador, respectively. Ecuador showed nothing. And in the end, if you start being results-based, they really didn't have to. The rain was just absolutely atrocious. Paraguay came in inspired. Paraguay fought more. Ecuador was basically non-existent for the most part. And as they saw that Peru were losing, okay, fine, no problem. Because as I had put out on social media before in my thread about how things could calculate, a win for Ecuador obviously was the easiest scenario, but a like result with Peru would also have them advance. And that was the case as they both did lose, but as I said before, like results in that case allow them to be able to advance to the World Cup, to qualify for the World Cup. That match was pretty simple to look at. Is again, Ecuador were non-existent. Paraguay were the one that fought a little bit more. Colombia and Bolivia. Colombia all of a sudden remembered how to score, and it was Luis Diaz the one that kind of propelled them to victory. And there was a lot of criticism with Juan Guillermo Cuadrado and what he was able to do and not do, what he was making mistakes in and his virtues. Overall, I think he got like a 6. On the pitch, he was the player that got the lowest ratings, according to a couple of publications. Even ESPN also had put him with a 6.1 or 6.2, somewhere along those lines. And maybe unfairly, but I understand it. There were some decisions that he did make that weren't the best ones. Sometimes when he'd pass, when he needed to pass at an angle, he'd end up passing it flat, or he'd end up passing a square ball instead of trying to angle it a little bit more. The pace on the ball wasn't exactly what was needed. So you saw that part, and you understood that totally. James Rodriguez had a good game. Who else am I thinking about? Daniel Munoz had a good game. Muriel, okay, he was good in my book. He did enough. And who else am I missing out on? For the most part, Colombia played well. And it was in the 38th minute when they scored, and it just seemed like this proverbial, it was just like a ton. It was like a ton of bricks just were lifted off of Colombia's shoulders after that goal was scored. Now, again, I'm not getting carried away, and I refuse to, because one definitely understands that Colombia played Bolivia, and Bolivia showed little resistance, little to not say any resistance. They went to defend themselves. They defended them off for 38 minutes. And after that, Colombia was a bit looser. They moved around well. They had a bit more luxury in moving players like Cuadrado from one angle to the other. James Rodriguez switched over to the right side so he could try an angle more inside, more towards goal. There were different movements. There were different positioning of players, but you had that luxury because Bolivia offered you that. Peru doesn't. Uruguay couldn't. And of course, don't even mention the match against Argentina where, they were the scarecrow, the lion, and the tin man put together. They lacked courage, they lacked heart, they lacked wisdom, and they lacked any type of wherewithal in that match against Argentina. So, is it an upgrade? Yeah. And it's something, because they needed to get a result. They needed to get the win. And on top of that, they got results that favored them. So from that perspective, that's a huge positive. So we look at it from that perspective, and you say, well, okay, fine. And not only that, A win combined with a draw or a loss for Peru, they're in the playoff. Who would have thunk it from a team that went 684 minutes or 686 minutes, add a minute or two here, but over 680 minutes without scoring a goal in World Cup qualifying play. If they qualify for the playoff spot, they would be the first team in CONMEBOL history to have below 50% efficiency at home and still qualify for the playoff spot. That doesn't guarantee them that they're going to advance, although the opposition that they would face would pretty much set it up. Now, in a one-off type of game, anything can happen. That's pretty much something that one can say without wincing, without stuttering. You can say that, hey, in these types of matches, anything can happen. So good job by Colombia. They were able to do their job. Peru, trust me, I thought when I saw that ball by Sergio Rochet, a ball gets crossed, Rochet traps it, and he ends up taking a couple of... I thought that ball went in. I thought it went in when I first saw it. And I thought that Peru were... I don't know if robbed is the right term, but they were wronged. They were absolutely wrong there. It was just... a bad decision, and then you started to see some of the images and things, and you say, okay, the entirety of the ball didn't cross the entirety of the line, therefore it's not. Okay, so good call there in the end. But Peru are very, they're very, and I'm trying to think of a word here that might not sound offensive, but they're a team that is very precise. And what I mean by precise is that they're, just enough. They have just enough to be able to compete. They have just enough to be able to give you problems. They have just enough to get a goal or two. They do just enough away from home. They'll have 2, maybe 3 opportunities on goal, maybe 4, if they're truly inspired away from home to create those types of situations for them. I mean, I'll give you a reference. When they played Colombia and they won, I think they had 2, maybe 3 shots on goal, maybe less. But they make it count. Gianluca Lapadura had probably the 2 best opportunities for Peru today, if you discount the opportunity that Rochet ends up almost walking into the goal with. So from that perspective, you start looking at what Peru did, and it just wasn't enough against Uruguay. Yeah, Uruguay, you can say all you want. At times they were slow. At times they didn't have the rhythm. Defensively, yeah, they did enough. Rochet, outside of that almost gaff, had a pretty solid game. Betancourt had a solid game. Valverde, oh my God, Valverde almost scored the goal of the tournament from about 40 out. I mean, the way he would just crank that ball from outside and the way he hit it, just amazing. And today, well, maybe not today. I shouldn't say today, but maybe in the past couple of days, you start realizing that maybe, just maybe by accident, Uruguay found themselves a right back in Ronald Araujo. And maybe Barcelona too, to be quite honest with you, in Ronald Araujo. Obviously, he's a center back, but man, he can play both very well. And be able to bomb forward and be able to defend and be able to be solid and be able to come in and be a goal-scoring threat. I mean, to me, he's super special. I'm really enjoying seeing Ronald Araujo play. Suarez played a few minutes too much. Maybe there should have been more time for Cavani. Darwin Nunez, I liked what Darwin Nunez did. And you start to see why he will probably be the player that ends up taking over Suarez and maybe Cavani's spot up top. But then you start looking at what Diego Alonso does. I still laugh when I think about when Diego Alonso was presented as Inter Miami coach, and Jorge Mas and David Beckham were talking about how he's such an offensive innovator. There was never anything offensive about Diego Alonso, and today you saw it if you weren't familiar with him. or if you saw him at Inter Miami, or if you didn't see him at Inter Miami or in Mexico, if you saw him today for the first time, you'd see exactly what everyone was talking about from a defensive standpoint, that he was very, very sheltered, very, you take the lead and let's just drop back and defend with everything we have. That's Diego Alonso. And sometimes he's even more conservative than Oscar Washington Tamares was. So you start seeing that, and that ends up being crucial. So Uruguay also ends up qualifying for the World Cup. And then finally Brazil just curb stomped Chile. Chile was sad. Chile is sad. The end of this golden generation of Chile is a sad one, man, to be quite honest with you. To see how they were handled, how they were toyed with. You heard the fans going and taunting them, and how little of a fight. Yeah, they had a goal disallowed, but how little they offered in terms of fight. They were just outclassed, out whatevered. You think of the term, and they were that was it. They were outplayed, outcoached, outmaneuvered, out adjusted, outrun, outworked, everything against Brazil. And Brazil came in wanting to prove a point. Brazil wanted to continue winning. Brazil don't want to let up. They qualified back in November. So let's keep that in mind. They qualified way back in November or October. But they still want to continue because they want to continue looking at these types of matches with an intensity that they require going into the World Cup. And that's why they want to take each and every match as such, as a dress rehearsal of sorts, with maybe a couple of different pieces depending on injuries, availability, whatever it may be. And that's why you saw Brazil that kept going and kept pushing and kept looking for the first goal. And look, in a span of 1 minute, the match was over. The penalty was scored by Neymar, and then a minute later, it was Vinicius Jr. scoring the second one. Done. Chile were done. Yeah, they scored and got disallowed, but that's another story. But outside of that, what do they show? Barely anything. So that's what makes it so sad to see Chile withering away. And despite all that, Chile could still qualify. Chile could still go and end up in the World Cup playoff. Despite all that, yeah, they need a couple. They would need for Colombia and Peru to not win, and they'd have to beat Uruguay, already qualified. Now, is there some motivation for Uruguay? Yeah, there could be. They don't want to lose. Now, who will play that match will also have a great deal of influence. But regardless of who steps onto the pitch, especially if it's more the second string players or those types of players for Uruguay, they're going to want to start establishing themselves to be part of the 23-man roster for Uruguay for the World Cup. So don't think by any stretch of the imagination that these Uruguayans are going to let up. Because now you're starting to fight for spots. Maybe Luis Suarez won't play. Maybe Edinson Cavani won't play. Maybe Darwin Núñez might, just to kind of assert himself. There'll probably be a few changes here and there. But you'll have people that are already looking at Qatar and knowing that this match could be the be-all and end-all for their aspirations. So keep that in mind. As I said, Chile, it's either win. Well, they have to win. If they don't win, forget it. We're not even having a conversation. So they have to win and expect Colombia and Peru to not win for them to be able to get that playoff spot. I move up a little bit more in the table. You look at Colombia. Colombia need to win and Peru to not win in order to be able to get through. Or they can draw and Peru have to lose. If they end up even in points right now, Colombia would end up being over Peru because Colombia are even and Peru are -5. So the first tiebreak would end up in goal difference. That ends up going to Colombia's favor. So either a win and a win and Peru not winning, or Peru not winning or Peru losing and Colombia being able to get a draw. And then of course for Peru it's win, draw, it's win or a like result with Colombia. And of course obviously Chile not winning in the process. So ends up being rather simple, and it's all three teams for one spot. So that'll be interesting to watch. Man, I took 20 minutes on this one. I hope that you guys enjoy. And trust me, midweek is going to be quite an exciting last day, as these three teams are going to duke it out. And I know they're going to leave it all out there, and it'll be quite a dramatic finish. And we might have one team at one point, another team at another point, and of course that finish line will be quite intense, as they're looking for those final spots, or that final spot in South America, to be able to dispute it against the team from Oceania. We'll see how that plays out, guys. All right, it's been a pleasure. Talk to you guys soon. Ciao.